Hello, I'm Scott Marcus, the Senior Content Manager with the International Screenwriters Association. I needed a little bit more information on three subgenres of movies and storytelling that I really don't know much about, and I thought you might find that interesting too. In this short conversation, presented in three parts, I'll be talking with Jeffrey Morales of the ISA about anime movies, video game movies, and comic book movies. Enjoy. Some of the biggest movies so far this year, the most successful movies, have been video game movies, adaptations from a video game to a film, which that is, again, something else that is very different from my childhood. That would always be the marquee of not only a bad movie, but if it went the other way, it would be a bad game. As we all know, I should say all know, but most people consider E.T., the game for Nintendo, the worst video game ever made. I will counter that the worst video game I've ever played was Fight Club, the video game for PlayStation. No. That was one of my favorite movies, still is one of my favorite movies ever, and the most difficult to play, boring, lame game that doesn't capture the world of Fight Club at all. Anyway, soapbox moment for me now. But yeah, let's talk about the fact that Uncharted, as you mentioned, Tom Holland did it so well. Sonic 2, finally, without the shackles of an impending pandemic, closing it down in the middle of its run, as the first Sonic had to experience. Those movies were tremendously successful so far. And I don't know, just what thoughts do you have on the state of video game movies today?
Let's think about where we actually came from in that area that you were just describing of comic book movies sucked. And like the best comic book movie was Mortal Kombat. Everyone pretty much agreed when I was a kid.
Video game movie.
Video game movie. Yes. The best video game based off a movie was probably, when I was a kid, Aladdin. There was a really good SNES Aladdin game, which I actually have over there because I just don't let anything go. The fundamental issue was when you wanted to make a movie into a video game, you had a problem of time. It takes longer to make a video game usually than it takes to make a movie. And you also had the issue of narrative difficulties, narrative contradictions. In a video game, there's no conflict. Usually you're just going ahead, you're playing the game, and that's it. Whereas in a movie, it's all about conflict and doubting and things like that.
Making decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing is, the more something is good, frankly, the better it is in its own medium, the more it takes advantage of that medium. And you don't read, for example, Ulysses and go, man, this would have been so much better as a movie. You have the exact opposite. You don't watch a great movie and say, man, I can't wait for them to write a book. No. However, you might look at something like Lord of the Rings and go, yeah, could you just like not talk about Fortnite travels over and over again and maybe just like make it a sweeping thing cinematically? That actually works. Not bashing Tolkien. Don't come at me. And so there was this inability to understand each other's mediums and other stories. And frankly, video game people didn't really care about movies. They were making video games, and the movie people didn't respect video games. What that transitioned to out of the 90s was in the aughts, we started to have cutscenes in video games where the video game play would just stop and you would just watch a little bit of a movie. I have to knock video game critics for this a little bit, is that they started going, wow, this was so cinematic. This was so much like a movie. And it was almost like an arms race of who could make the most movie-like game, to the point where you're starting to have video games that had minimal gameplay. And it was all about just, okay, get from A to B so you can get to that next cutscene, which is not inherently bad necessarily if it's suited to the format. Is there a reason why I need to be the one to get us from scene to scene? There's actually an entire genre in Japan of visual novels where the gameplay is almost entirely go from point A to point B to talk to a person, to start a dialogue, to advance a branching plot line. And here's the funny part. A lot of those visual novels, they get adapted into anime. Really, really awesome anime. So there are ways you can look at something and go, oh, this is great. Let's translate it into another medium. But you need to understand it. And you also need to understand that this is good because it's got a unique creative spirit, not because it's just like what you use. And there are things like Assassin's Creed, which came out. To some extent, the new Mortal Kombat, they had a lot of cutscenes in those games. Also Uncharted. These are games that are getting more attention because they've found ways to imitate movies. And they've found ways to make it so that a producer can look at it and go, well, I see characters, I see plot lines, I see set pieces. This seems a lot easier to adapt than a talking blue hedgehog. Frankly, I know Uncharted has a lot of fans, including on the ISA team, and that it is very critically lauded. That game series has always struck me as, well, this wouldn't be great as a movie, and that's what the movie was. Okay, and it did pretty well, but a lot of its box office potential seems to have come from, in my opinion, Tom Holland. So it really took someone understanding Sonic to be able to make a great movie. But here's the best part: they didn't understand Sonic at first, and we all know that because we all saw that first trailer.
And the character design, it changed a lot.
And do you know who did the new character design?
Not at all.
I'm not saying I have a personal connection to the guy, but I have a personal investment in his story.
Okay.
Because this guy Tyson was a web comic artist back in like 2000. As weird as this sounds, you had all these people when the internet came out who wanted to do comic books. They wanted to do joke comics, but they couldn't draw. So what they did was they did sprite comics. They would grab little sprites of Sonic and they would make a comic book out of it.
So what do you mean when you say sprite? I don't know the word other than the soft drink.
Oh, okay. So when you see a little blocky Sonic in an in a Genesis game,
okay,
that little image is called a sprite.
Okay.
And so it's just a little image file that's on
overlaid
old consoles. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so Sprite Comic was taking all of those predetermined assets and just using them to create art. Well, what do we have sprites of? We have sprites of Sonic, we have sprites of Mario and Mega Man. So it was this little subgenre in the 2000s that's largely gone away now. And part of the reason it went away was you started to have actual artists start to get online and you had affordable tablets and things like that. One of them was this guy named Tyson, but he still needed to work in the sprite environment. So he wrote and drew an incredibly inappropriate, juvenile, not funny Sonic comic.
Okay.
But he was good at it. He was a very gifted artist, and he understood enough about Sonic to make fun of it and how to draw him. So he actually got hired to do work on the official Sonic comic. He seemed to have this understanding of the Sonic character, especially as he matured and he was able to keep applying what he had learned just as a person. And so then they had a game, Sonic Mania, where they wanted to reanimate Sonic in the old 1990s style, which is almost a lost art at this point. And he was part of the animation team. And it's gorgeous. It's some of the best Sonic has ever looked in his entire franchise. It's absolutely fantastic. And you know, when you're a fan and you see something like the Sonic trailer, a lot of the Sonic fans are just going to go, man, did you get Tyson to do this? But then they did. They actually went and they hired him to do the character art design. And it can be understated that when you have a very talented voice actor, as they did, and you have just a character design, that's invaluable. And if you can make an okay movie, which was what this first Sonic movie was, and you have people who take a step back and go, okay, well, we know it wasn't working because we almost released it, and we know what is working. Let's lean more into what's working. Then you get that environment for a great hit sequel. And so I'm very happy to see Sonic doing so well.
That's cool. So did he did the redesign, Tyson did.
He did the redesign, yeah.
Wow, that everybody loves. That's great.
Yeah, because as an artist, he understood, like, okay, you can change this to get it to work in this environment, and you can change this. That's the thing I really want to hone in on here, is that it's looking at what Sonic was as a sprite, really, as a comic book character, as a video game character, and going, okay, well, you can change his spikes a little bit here, and you can change his eyes, because Sonic famously has one giant eyeball in the game, because it works for sprites. It doesn't work for live action. But you can change it this much. And then all of a sudden you don't just have a Sonic that you've shoved into live action. Now you have a Sonic that is uniquely suited to live action. I always tell writers, don't write in the negatives. Don't write, okay, what can I not do? Instead, you want to be asking, what can I do because I have this possible restriction? You know, if I say to myself, I'm going to tell a grounded sci-fi story, think about all the stories you can tell when you don't have to worry about giant set pieces.
Sure.
Don't write in the negatives. And with Sonic, it really started to feel like the second movie that they said, okay, what can we do? What can we do now that we've embraced the cartoonishness, balanced it out with some real world stuff, and we're working with material that is so different from what we typically adapt? Whereas when you look at something like Uncharted or Assassin's Creed, it's more, okay, what can we salvage? What do we need to take off that's a video game so that we can just have our movie? And you just don't see that unique opportunity with those movies like you do with Sonic. I don't know what's going to happen with Mario. I don't know how Chris Pratt's going to do. We'll see. But I really hope that people start approaching these video game movies and really not going for the stuff that looks cinematic, but going to the stuff that goes, wow, this is so weird. What is the unique opportunity here for a story?
That's great. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, Mario is on the horizon. Any other video game movies that you're looking forward to in 2022?
I think we're set. I don't
Yeah,
think anybody's gonna eclipse Sonic.
sure.
And video games right now are in an interesting state. They're about to start kind of cooling off because video games famously had to play second fiddle to movies. The reason why they had to play second fiddle to movies was because the people who made video games just assumed that everyone in the summer was gonna go watch movies.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
And so video games just wouldn't come out in the summer when a lot of kids were home waiting to play video games.
sure.
So that actually kind of still exists today. So we're not going to see a lot of video game releases. I don't think we're going to see a lot of tie-ins to movies and things like that. I think we've wrapped up video games for now.
At the end of 2021, there was a movie, and again, it's very difficult to really judge a success or a failure. And of course, we never really want to use those terms, but I guess when it's dollars and cents, it's a little bit easier to define. There's less gray area, I suppose. But Resident Evil did not perform very well. Came out at the end of 2021, as I mentioned. It opened at just 5.3 million, went on to just accumulate 17 million, which I think, I don't know what the production budget was for that one, but I'd have to imagine they were expecting or hoping for more than 17 million domestically. Do you have any thoughts on why that franchise is kind of petering out, it seems?
This is getting back to exactly what I was talking about, which is video games embracing a cinematic element and then people making movies going, okay, can we just take the cinematic elements, put them into a movie and just assume that's going to elevate the project? Even with something like Resident Evil, where it works, because those are very good games, especially the ones that have been coming out recently, they've actually changed the nature of their stories in recent years because they've said, oh, wait a minute, we're trying to be more cinematic, so we need entirely different lead characters. They completely set aside the entire cast 2 installments ago to make Resident Evil 7. And they set the thing in Louisiana and had a completely different type of virus that caused a completely different type of zombies. And so if they had started there and said, okay, well, can we understand why Resident Evil is making these changes for a more mature audience? I think they would have had a more successful movie. But they kind of were doing an overcorrection where they're saying, well, we had the Mila Jovovich movies, and which were nothing like that franchise of video games. And so everything just kind of got bad.
Yeah, lost its focus.
There are 2 things going on with the Resident Evil reboot. The first one is just because you're faithful to the text doesn't mean you're going to have a more successful movie. As much as the fans might want it, just as you might have thought that was the case with Sonic. It's not that they were more faithful with Sonic. It's that they understood what to translate in a better way. With the Resident Evil movie, it was just, well, let's take those cinematic elements, put them in there, and hope that the movie does better. The second thing is that a lot of these franchise movies don't succeed on or fail on their own merits. A lot of these movies will have a hit installment that does really well commercially, and then they'll follow it up with a commercially failing project, but a box office hit. And then it's the next movie that actually has the box office drop off, even if the critics say, oh, no, wait, they fixed all the problems from the last one. The reason is because the audience will all come out in those early weekends, they'll make the movie a hit, and then the word will spread, the sentiment will start to be negative. And that actually gets us back to Spider-Man, because after Spider-Man 3, Sony went, oh, people didn't really like that third Spider-Man. Let's reboot. And then after the second Andrew Garfield one, they were like, oh, people didn't really like that second Andrew Garfield one. We kind of know that the next one's not going to do too well. In the case of Resident Evil, you had a lot of movies that just weren't doing well critically. And they were succeeding on just getting that niche audience and leaning on it more and more. And so then when they put out a movie that was more accessible to people, however you want to feel about the critical ups and downs of that franchise, it's just the word of mouth was too much for that one movie to overcome. And so I really think it's going to be a challenge for them to reboot that franchise and make a hit. And I don't think the way they did it was the best way.
Hmm.
I think you really need to possibly even put some more time between the installments.
Talking about video games in general and talking about Sonic specifically, this is a great opportunity to mention Stop Watching Movies, which is a series that we are doing here at the ISA, starring Jeffrey, ours truly. So if you want to talk just really briefly about what the premise is behind that series, in case anybody hasn't seen an episode yet.
Well, the premise of it is really born from experiences. It's to get people who want to write or simply understand movies and TV to look outside of those boundaries, at least when we're talking about Hollywood. Go watch something that's outside of the Hollywood system, maybe from Japan, maybe from France, maybe from Latin America, or perhaps look at a book and understand how you tell a story in that medium versus in film. And then when you come back to screenwriting, you can understand the unique opportunities that are in that medium. And it's also a celebration of all the different types of storytelling, which I still remember when I learned film, my original lessons were actually audio commentaries from DVDs. And there's a great one by Nick Meyer, who did Star Trek II. And he opens it by saying that he didn't consider himself a novelist or a screenwriter. He considered himself a storyteller. And he would work in different mediums. And that allowed him to understand, here's where I am right now, what I'm dealing with in this medium. And he could bring a literary element to Star Trek, which he did with The Wrath of Khan. He could bring a bit more of a cinematic quality even to his novels. He did the 7% Solution. It's a way to expand your horizons, but also I feel like enrich your passion for screenwriting in the end.